Hello and welcome to another episode of Laptop Retrospective, and today we are looking at this tiny little Dell. You could say it's mini, in fact. You could even say that it is the Mini 1012 Inspiron. Now, this is an interesting machine because it is running an Atom processor. This one in particular is running an N450. It's got a whopping 2 gigs of RAM and a humongous 80 gigabyte hard drive. With specs like that, what in the world could it possibly be for? Well, when this thing came out, the big thing that it was toting was actually its screen. This was supposed to be a HD-ready display at 1366 by 768, and it was supposed to include the Broadcom Crystal HD chip, which was supposed to make decoding of 720p and 1080p videos pretty decent and quite quick. And it also boasted a pretty good battery life among computers this size. In other words, it was a glorified video player that had a keyboard attached to it with a good amount of battery life. Realistically, though, that was pretty much all it did, and one of the criticisms that was levied pretty heavily against it is that it was an HD-capable machine without an HDMI output. That's right, the only video out that you are getting with this particular unit is actually VGA, and that is located on the left-hand side with two USB 2.0 ports, a SD card slot, which is full SD, I should say, not a combo, a separate microphone and headphone jack, another USB port, and of course your network port. And then along the back, we've got the Kensington lock, and then our power port. So in other words, it was a pretty bare bones machine. We do have a web camera located up at the top of the display along with a microphone. Other than that, there wasn't a whole lot to really write home about it. It was just one of the other netbooks that was out there. At any rate, let's go ahead and take this apart because it is quirky in a couple of areas. And then we'll talk about whether or not this is a machine that, you know, at this day and age, what is it good for? All right. So first things first, we obviously need to detach the battery. Now the battery is interesting. It's held in by these two catches, and instinct says pull the catches, pull out the back, but that's not the case. You actually have to press each catch over until you hear it click, and then there is a small cutaway here where you kind of dig a fingernail in there and lift the battery back and out. So that is not necessarily what you would call intuitive. You will notice that there are several screws along the bottom. Most of those, unless you're removing the motherboard in this thing, are actually entirely useless for our case. So I've gone ahead and removed this screw, and this screw, because they are what holding the keyboard in place. And the keyboard is actually what is holding everything inside of this unit. Now, I tried using my regular method of taking a credit card and going along the top to get the plastic to separate, but it is just too tight in terms of its tolerances. And there is a warning in the maintenance manual that these keycaps break easily. They just come right out and say it. So how do you get in without using a huge amount of force? Well, you use a huge amount of force, but you spread it over a wide surface area so no one part has to take on the damage. So what I suggest is you take your fingers here and you actually hook them in the top of the keys along the function row, and then pull up ever so slightly until you can get a few fingernails underneath the bottom of the actual membrane, and then encourage it out, just like that. And if we flip it up and over, we do have a ribbon cable that is securing the keyboard in place right there that we will need to disconnect. So these latches down in here are what we need to encourage to back up and out. So I'm just going to take an encouragement tool and flick those latches into a more cooperative position, like so, and there and out we come. So with the keyboard out of the way, we more or less have access to everything that we would need to access and upgrade. We can disconnect the palm rest, which would require the removal of this entire top plate right there. To remove the hard drive should be normally 2 screws. In this case, it is just the one, and a Torx T8 seems to do the job. So once again, we've got the inconvenience of the not really corporate security screw. And then we pull the tab, and then the whole hard drive can be removed. So this can be easily be replaced with a hard drive that is considerably larger, faster, all of that good stuff. Once we have that out of the way, we'll go ahead and change our bits back to a regular Phillips. And we can loosen this one retaining screw, and there is our RAM. And whoever had this last put Corsair RAM in it, of all things. That's all right, whatever floats your boat. So yeah, that's pretty much all there is to take apart on this machine, other than just taking the board out. As you can see, it only really makes up about half of the chassis. The other half is taken up by the actual mechanical hard drive, and that is par the course for a lot of these netbooks. So let us quickly reassemble this, and then we'll walk through the rest of the machine and say anything else that needs to be said. So now that we have it all back together, one thing that's actually worth pointing out is the design of the hinge. You'll notice that the display, it doesn't go all the way to the rear of the case, and what this actually does is create a very balanced machine. One of the challenges that you'll have is if your display goes all the way to the edge, it actually can create a scenario where the machine might actually tip over. Case in point, one issue that is particularly exacerbated, say, on a machine that is equal in terms of its weight, is tipping over the Surface Book is incredibly easy. It'll just fall on its face because both of these pieces are very equally weighted. Now, they did not want that situation to occur in this, ultralight netbook that was designed for media consumption, so they moved that back and used the extra space for battery, really. And it's not going to be your fastest tool in the shed by any stretch of the imagination. So we are booting up right now. It is running again in this particular unit, the mechanical hard drive, so we need to temper our expectations accordingly. The screen is very glossy, highly reflective. It seems to be pretty bright. Our trackpad it's got a decent feel. It's definitely not what you would call smooth to the touch. And the buttons are very, very firm. In fact, there is very little give in this whole trackpad area, and it's actually nice to see that it is generally sized and they've foregone any attempt to make physical buttons work on such a small piece of real estate. That is, I think, a pretty good choice. They also decided to not make the keyboard any smaller than they absolutely had to, but I do find that you're not even halfway on the palm rest. It's about a quarter of you hanging off. So it's almost best to lay... No, it's not comfortable to lay your wrist because then you can't reach the top row, so you kind of have to do this weird suspension thing. Bottom line is I really wouldn't want to type on one of these for any extended length of time. I think that would be a very unpleasant experience. So this battery isn't brand new. It's lasting approximately 4 hours according to the calibration, and that is on performance mode. So if we dive that down to a more economic setting, we'll get that the opportunity to recalculate and see what we get. Other than that, we have your basic controls for brightness and all your hotkeys. There really isn't a whole lot to write home about when it comes down to this. This is one of these machines that is very much the product of its time. It really doesn't fit in a computing world of today unless you have a very specific need for a small and easy to access guts of a computer. The nice thing is that the keyboard doubles as the bottom plate, so you're removing the keyboard every time you're servicing the machine to pull out the rest of the parts, which is actually a pretty economical way of doing things, and then using the white body as kind of the clamshell that everything fits into. So in terms of a utilitarian design choice, that's actually not a bad one. At any rate, I think that that's pretty much all there is to say on this simple device. It definitely had a few design choices that I think that some modern manufacturers could take note of, like the idea that the screen does not need to be at the very back of the entire unit itself. That does lend to a greater amount of balance, the less likely of it being knocked off. Those of you that have ThinkPads with extended batteries will know what I mean by like the reverse grip, which is kind of nice for carrying it around and making sure that it's a bit more secure in your hand. I hope that you enjoyed this sort of content, and feel free to do the big four at the bottom. You have the like button, of course. Please share the video to anyone that would be interested. Subscribe if you want to support the channel, and of course click the notification bell to be notified when new videos like this one show up. And I do want to thank you very much for voting on the Dell being the next machine that I review. If you enjoyed the poll, please do let me know in the comments down below if that's something that I should do more often when the opportunity arises. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.